one of the most famous newsmen in America, a man whose great-great-great-grandfather was once the richest human being on earth, was told by his own mother, plainly, not to expect a single dollar. "There is no trust fund," she said. There was no pot of gold. His mother had been born into the largest fortune the United States had ever produced. As a child, she was so valuable that two grown women dragged each other through court for the right to own her. The photographers fought to capture her face. The whole country called her, with a strange mix of envy and pity, the poor little rich girl. So how does a fortune large enough to dwarf the US Treasury vanish so completely that its most famous descendant grows up being told to expect nothing? And how does the heiress at the center of it lose not one great fortune, but three? This is the story of the Vanderbilts. And of Gloria Vanderbilt, the little girl at the bottom of the fall. Her family built railroads that stitched a nation together and mansions that humbled European kings. And within a single lifetime, that ocean of money drained away to almost nothing in her hands. A founder who believed in money and nothing else. A child auctioned between a mother and an aunt in the cruelest custody trial of the age. And three separate fortunes, inherited, married and self-made, each one lost in a different, devastating way. Watch this not as a story about the very rich. Watch it as the question every parent eventually faces. What are we actually leaving our children? And remember a single worn object, a pair of jeans with a name stitched in gold thread. We will come back to it. Begin in the harbor, with a boy who quit school at 11. He was born in 1794 on Staten Island, the son of poor Dutch farmers, in a colonial outpost that barely qualified as a town. He had no education to speak of, no manners worth the name, and a tongue so coarse it would scandalize drawing rooms for the rest of his long life. What he had was a single, ferocious instinct, that the man who controls the movement of goods controls everything. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt. At 16, he borrowed money to buy one small boat and began ferrying passengers across New York Harbor. By his 20s, they were calling him the Commodore. Half in respect, half in mockery. He earned the respect. The mockery he buried under money. Picture him, tall, fierce, profane, a man who settled business disputes with his fists into his 50s, who once wrote to associates who had crossed him, "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I will ruin you." And he did. He crushed competitors in shipping, then turned to the new iron arteries of the age, railroads. He seized control of the New York Central, the line that bound New York to Chicago, the spine of a growing nation's commerce. Wherever money moved, the Commodore put his hand on the valve. But here is what defined him, and what would poison everything downstream. Cornelius Vanderbilt loved money, and almost nothing else. He had 13 children and regarded most of them as disappointments. He humiliated his sons, dominated his wife so completely that he once had her committed to an asylum when she resisted his wishes, and measured every human being, including his own blood, by a single yardstick. Could they make and keep a dollar? He was not building a family. He was building a fortune, and the family was simply the vessel he intended to pour it into. He had one belief about his descendants, a conviction about what money does to the people who inherit it rather than earn it, that he stated near the end of his life. We will return to exactly what he said. He meant it as hard-won wisdom. It would read, a century later, like a prophecy. By the time Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he had done something no American had ever done. He had accumulated a personal fortune estimated at over $100 million, a sum, by many accounts, greater than the amount of money held in the United States Treasury at the time. One man, from one harbor, with one boat to start, had out-accumulated the federal government. Adjusted forward, his fortune ran into the tens of billions. And then he did the thing that reveals everything about him. He did not divide it. The Commodore left roughly 95% of his entire estate to a single son, William Henry Vanderbilt, the one boy he judged capable of guarding money. The other children, the wife's family, the daughters, the son he despised. Scraps. He was not rewarding love. He was protecting capital, choosing the one heir least likely to let it leak. And William did not just guard it, he doubled it. In the 8 short years before his own death in 1885, William Henry Vanderbilt grew the fortune to roughly $200 million, making him briefly the richest man in the world. It was the high water mark. Never again would the family hold so much. William is also remembered for 3 words that capture the dynasty's soul at its peak: Pressed by a reporter about whether he ran the railroads for the public benefit, he snapped. The public be damned. That was the inheritance. Not just the money, the attitude. The conviction that the Vanderbilts owed the world nothing, and the world owed them everything. Andrew Carnegie, watching fortunes pass to children who had not made them, warned that the parent who leaves his son enormous wealth generally deadens the talents and energies of the son and tempts him to lead a less useful and less worthy life than he otherwise would. The Vanderbilts were about to prove him right, on a scale the world had never witnessed, because the third generation did not guard the money and did not grow it. They spent it, magnificently, competitively, insanely. They built the most opulent mansions the continent had ever seen, the Fifth Avenue Chateau, the Breakers in Newport, the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, the largest private home in America. They threw balls that cost millions in today's money. They married their daughters to European dukes, buying titles with railroad cash. The fortune that took the Commodore 80 years of obsession to build, his descendants set about dismantling in a single, glittering generation of pleasure. Stand for a moment inside the dynasty at its absolute height. It is the Gilded Age. The Vanderbilt name is the most powerful private name in America. There are more Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue than any other family could dream of. At Newport, the Breakers rises like an Italian palace over the Atlantic. 70 rooms, gold leaf, imported marble, a house built purely to announce that its owners had run out of things to want. Picture the costume ball Alva Vanderbilt threw in 1883 to force New York's old aristocracy to finally accept the family. 1,200 guests, a house turned into a fantasy of flowers and jewels, a single evening that cost a fortune most Americans could not earn in 1,000 lifetimes. The message was total. There is the rest of the world, and there are the Vanderbilts. They had everything the Commodore had ever fought for, multiplied beyond reason. Palaces, titles, the fear and envy of an entire nation. The name was a synonym for wealth itself. And this is the cruelest part of the whole story, so hold on to it. At the exact moment the Vanderbilts looked most invincible, marble, gold, dukes, palaces, the fortune had already begun to die. They simply could not see it, because they were too busy spending it. The dynasty was at its peak, and the peak was the beginning of the fall. Look closely at the foundation beneath all that marble, and you find a crack the Commodore himself had cut. He had built a fortune but never a family. He left his money to the one son who could keep it, and in doing so, he taught the entire bloodline a lethal lesson, that in this family, you were worth exactly what you were worth in dollars. Love was conditional. Approval was financial. You earned your place at the table by guarding the pile, or you were cut out. But here is what the cold old man never calculated. When you teach your descendants that money is the only thing that matters, and then you hand them so much that they never have to earn a cent, you have not secured them. You have disarmed them. You have raised a generation that worships money and has no idea how to make it, only how to spend it. And among those descendants, 3 generations down, one fragile branch was already bending toward the ground. The branch that would produce a baby, girl named Gloria. Within 50 years of William Henry Vanderbilt being the richest man on earth, the unthinkable would happen. The mansions would be torn down or sold. The fortune would scatter. And at a family gathering decades later, it was said that among scores of Vanderbilt descendants, there was no longer a single millionaire among them. But long before that final humiliation, the rot reached one particular man, a charming doomed heir named Reginald. And through him, it reached his infant daughter, and turned her, at the age of 10, into the most fought-over child in America. For a while, the spending looked like strength. Into the early 20th century, the Vanderbilts were still American royalty. Still the balls, the yachts, the Newport cottages with 40 servants. A Vanderbilt daughter had married a duke. A Vanderbilt name still opened any door in the Western world. To the public, the dynasty looked eternal, and this is exactly where these stories deceive you. The grand facade, the endless summers, the sense that a family this powerful simply cannot fall. You look at the marble and you assume the foundation matches. It did not. Behind the facade, the arithmetic was merciless. A great fortune, divided among more and more heirs each generation, thinned with every birth. And these were heirs trained only to consume. Each mansion needed a fortune just to heat and staff. Each generation spent faster than the investments could refill the well. The Commodore's 100 million, William's 200 million, vast as it was being asked to fund palaces, divorces, gambling and idleness across an exploding family tree. The breakers, the Newport Palace, cost a fortune merely to maintain each year. Multiply that by a dozen great houses and 100 entitled descendants, and you have a machine that does only one thing: burn money. The Vanderbilts had built the most expensive way of life in human history, and attached no engine to pay for it. The fortune was not stolen. It was not lost in a crash. It was simply spent, beautifully, relentlessly, generation after generation, until the well ran dry. And no one embodied that beautiful, ruinous decline more completely than the man who would become Gloria's father. His name was Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt. He was a great-grandson of the Commodore, born in 1880 into almost unimaginable wealth, and he was, by every account, charming, handsome, generous, and utterly useless. He never worked a meaningful day in his life. He bred horses. He went to parties. And above all, he gambled and he drank, both on a scale that even the Vanderbilt fortune struggled to absorb. Reginald ran through the bulk of his personal inheritance by his early 40s. He squandered it at the card table and the racetrack, the living proof of Carnegie's warning. A man handed millions he had not earned, who therefore never learned how money is made, only how thrilling it is to lose. In 1923, the aging, dissipated Reginald married for the second time. His bride was an 18-year-old beauty named Gloria Morgan, barely more than a girl, dazzled by the Vanderbilt name and the world it promised. He was past 40, his liver already failing, his fortune already mostly gone. On February 20th, 1924, they had a daughter. They named her Gloria, after her mother. Gloria Laura Vanderbilt. She was born with the most golden name in America, and almost none of the gold left to back it. The mansions still stood, the names still glittered, but the man who fathered her had already burned through his share, and the dynasty's wider fortune was thinning fast. She was from her very first breath a poor little rich girl, rich in name, and increasingly poor in everything that name was supposed to guarantee. Then, in 1925, before she was even 2 years old, Reginald Vanderbilt died of cirrhosis of the liver. Drink had finished what the gambling started. He left his teenage widow and his infant daughter behind. But here is the detail that set the entire tragedy in motion. Reginald had run through so much of his own money that what remained for little Gloria was a trust fund. Money she could not touch until adulthood, controlled in the meantime by others. By some estimates, that trust held a few $1 million. An enormous sum then, the equivalent of tens of millions today. And there it was, a fatherless baby, a 20-year-old widow with expensive tastes and no fortune of her own, and a multi-million-dollar trust fund, sitting just out of reach, attached to the child like bait. Whoever controlled little Gloria controlled the allowance that flowed from that trust. The child was no longer just a child. She was an income stream, and the adults around her knew it. The stage was set for one of the ugliest family wars America had ever watched. And it would all be fought over the body of one frightened 10-year-old girl. To understand how cruelly this family could treat its own, you have to go back to the Commodore's own children. Because Gloria was not the first Vanderbilt destroyed by the family's worship of money. The Commodore had a son named Cornelius Jeremiah Vanderbilt. He suffered from epilepsy in an age that did not understand it, and from a gambling habit he could not master. His father was merciless. The old man saw a son who lost money as a defective vessel, and when the Commodore died in 1877, he left this son almost nothing, while pouring the fortune into the favored William. Cornelius Jeremiah contested the will, in a sensational public trial that aired the family's contempt for its own. He won a small annuity, and in 1882, broken by debt and despair, he shot himself in a hotel room. The Commodore's verdict on his own son, worthless because he could not keep money, had become a death sentence. Watch the pattern, because it is the whole story. The founder taught the family that a Vanderbilt who cannot hold money is worthless. That belief killed one son in a hotel room in 1882. 50 years later, the same belief would put a 10-year-old girl on trial. Because to this family, a child was not a person to be loved, but an asset to be controlled. By the 1930s, little Gloria's mother, the young widow, was living abroad, spending the child's trust allowance on a glamorous European life, often leaving the girl in the care of her devoted nanny, Emma Keislich, the woman Gloria called Dodo, the only constant source of love in her childhood. And watching all this, with mounting fury, was Reginald's sister, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. wealthy in her own right, a serious sculptor, the founder of what would become the Whitney Museum, and a formidable, controlling woman who decided that her brother's child was being neglected and that she would take her. But was it love that drove Gertrude? Or was it once again the family instinct to seize and control a Vanderbilt asset before someone else spent it? That question would never be cleanly answered. What is certain is that in 1934, these two women, the mother and the aunt, went to war over a 10-year-old child in open court before a ravenous press. Not yet a death, but something colder. The moment a frightened little girl learned that in the House of Vanderbilt, even a child is property. The first crack in Gloria's life had become a chasm, and the whole country was about to watch her fall into it. To the newspapers, it was the greatest show of 1934. They called it the trial of the poor little rich girl, and the public devoured it. A Vanderbilt heiress. A glamorous young mother accused of neglect, of a scandalous private life, of caring more for the Riviera than for her own daughter. A grand aunt fighting to seize the child. And in the middle, a pale, terrified 10-year-old whose face sold newspapers across the nation. The public saw a thrilling society cease scandal. Wealth, beauty, betrayal. What the public did not see was the actual 10-year-old at the center of it. A child being asked to choose, in effect, between her own mother and her aunt, while lawyers dissected her family in front of the world. The most damaging testimony of all would come not from the wealthy adults but from the servants. The nanny, the household staff, whose accounts of what really went on behind the mansion doors would help decide the child's fate. What had Dodo seen? What had the stuff witnessed? The press strained at every leaked word. The Vanderbilt name had once meant railroads and palaces, and the public be damned. Now it meant a custody scandal splashed across every front page in America. The family's private cruelty turned into national entertainment. The dynasty that built itself on controlling everything had lost control of the one thing it could not buy back: its dignity. The court reached its verdict, and it did something almost no one expected. It took the child away from her own mother. Custody went, in the main, to the aunt. The mother was reduced to a visitor in her daughter's life, and little Gloria Vanderbilt, the richest poor child in America, learned that the people fighting hardest to have her had never once asked what she wanted. The 1934 verdict did not give Gloria to the person who loved her most. It gave her to the person with the most power. Custody went, in the main, to her aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Her mother, the young widow, was reduced to a weekend visitor in her own daughter's life, granted limited access and a sharply cut allowance. And then came the cruelest stroke of all, the one that revealed exactly how this family understood love. The court ordered that Dodo, Emma Keisley, the nanny who had raised Gloria from infancy, the one human being the child trusted completely, be removed from her life. The single source of unconditional warmth in a 10-year-old's world was simply legislated away, deemed too attached, too influential. They took the fortune child and stripped her of the one person who loved her for nothing. Gloria Vanderbilt would later write about that childhood with a clarity that never softened. She described feeling, throughout those years, like an object, a thing fought over, evaluated, possessed, never a daughter, never simply a little girl. She had a famous name and a trust fund worth a fortune. What she did not have was a single adult in her life who wanted her more than they wanted what came attached to her. And here is the inheritance passing down the generations, not the money, the wound. The Commodore taught the family that a Vanderbilt is worth what a Vanderbilt is worth in dollars. 3 generations later, a 10-year-old girl absorbed exactly that lesson, in the most literal way imaginable. She learned that she was valuable, and that her value was the reason no one could simply love her. The founder's doctrine had finally reached a child small enough to be broken by it. She grew up beautiful, anxious, and searching, a girl who had everything money could label and nothing money could not. And she would spend the next 60 years of her life chasing the one thing the Vanderbilt fortune had never once provided. To be wanted for herself and not for what she was worth. Watch what that hunger does, because it explains everything that follows. A child who learns that love is conditional and money is leverage becomes an adult who cannot tell the two apart, who marries for rescue, who trusts the wrong people because they offer warmth, who, given 3 separate fortunes across one lifetime, loses every one of them, because she was never taught what money was for, only that it was the thing that made her a prize. This is the engine of the entire tragedy, and now you can see it running. The Vanderbilts did not fail because they were unlucky. They failed because the Commodore built a family that worshipped money and never learned to hold it, love it correctly, or live without it. Gloria was the purest product of that failure, and the most significant, because she was, by every account, a genuinely kind and gifted woman, trapped inside a name that had taught her all the wrong things. The custody trial was the first crack. Now came the collapse. 3 fortunes, 3 losses, each one a different face of the same inherited flaw. The first fortune was the one she was born with, and it would slip through her fingers before she even understood it was gone. So who betrayed Gloria Vanderbilt? The easy answer is her mother, painted in court as neglectful, or her aunt, who seized her. But the real betrayal is older and larger than either woman. Gloria was betrayed by the family system itself, by a founder dead half a century, who had decided that money was the only thing worth protecting, and had bred that conviction into every branch of the tree. By the time Gloria was born, no one in that family knew how to do the one thing she needed: love a child as a child. They only knew how to fight over an asset. The mother fought for the allowance. The aunt fought for control. The lawyers fought for fees. And not one of them, in the entire spectacle, was fighting for her. The deepest betrayal in this story is not a villain. It is an absence. The absence of a single Vanderbilt capable of looking at a frightened 10-year-old and seeing a person instead of a prize. That was the Commodore's true legacy. Not the railroads, not the mansions. A family so thoroughly trained to value money that it had forgotten how to value its own children. And a little girl who paid the price for a lesson, taught by a man she never met. She would carry that betrayal into every relationship, and every fortune, for the rest of her life. The first fortune was her inheritance, that multi-million-dollar trust from her dead father. But here is the truth behind the rich girl headline. By the time Gloria reached adulthood and gained access to it, years of allowances, legal fees, and the family's chaotic management had thinned it. And Gloria herself, generous, impulsive, never taught the value of a dollar by anyone who loved her, gave large portions of it away and spent, freely. The inheritance that had made her the most fought-over child in America quietly dwindled. The first fortune slipped away not in a crash, but in the simple, fatal Vanderbilt way. It was never guarded, because she was never taught how. The second fortune came through marriage, and through marriage it left. Gloria married 4 times, and the early marriages read like a wounded girl's search for the father and the safety she never had. At 17, she married Pat DiCicco, a Hollywood agent who, she later said, was abusive. Then, at 21, she married the conductor Leopold Stokowski, 42 years her senior, old enough to be her grandfather. Then film director Sidney Lumet. Each union brought wealth and status within reach. Each one ended, taking a measure of her fortune and her stability with it. See the pattern the trial planted. A child who learned that love comes attached to money grew into a woman who kept reaching for both at once, and kept losing both together. It was only with her 4th husband, the writer Wyatt Cooper, that Gloria finally found something like real love. But even that, even genuine happiness, the Vanderbilt curse would not let her keep. Here is where Gloria Vanderbilt becomes something no Vanderbilt before her had ever been. She earned it herself. In the late 1970s, in her 50s, Gloria did the thing the Commodore respected above all else, and his idle descendants had forgotten how to do. She built a fortune from her own work. She lent her name and her eye to a line of designer blue jeans. And she did not just license a logo. She became the face of them, appearing in her own commercials with that warm, knowing smile, her signature stitched in gold across the back pocket, a swan embroidered beside it. The Gloria Vanderbilt jeans empire exploded. At its peak, it was a designer denim phenomenon, generating reportedly over $100 million a year in sales, and helping launch the entire designer jeans craze of the 1980s. A Vanderbilt had finally made money, instead of merely inheriting and spending it. And she had done it, not with railroads but with her own name, her own face, and her own taste. For a moment, the poor little rich girl had rewritten her own story. The third fortune was hers, earned, deserved, proof that she was more than an asset other people fought over. And then it was stolen, by the 2 men she trusted most. Gloria had placed her financial life in the hands of her attorney, Thomas Andrews, and her psychiatrist, a man named Christ Zoor. These were the people she relied on. Her lawyer and her therapist the two roles a person trusts with their money and their mind. And according to the lawsuit she later filed, they betrayed her on both fronts, mismanaging and siphoning her finances, entangling her money in ventures that served them, leaving her exposed. When the wreckage was tallied in the early 1990s, Gloria Vanderbilt, who had earned a self-made fortune, discovered she owed millions of dollars in back taxes to the IRS, money her trusted advisors had failed to set aside. To pay the government, she had to sell almost everything: her grand homes, her possessions, the trappings of the life her name had always promised. She sued Andrews and Zoy for fraud in 1993. But the third fortune, the one she had actually built with her own hands, was effectively gone. Stop and absorb the full weight of this. 3 fortunes. The first, inherited, slipped away because she was never taught to hold it. The second, married, dissolved in her search for love. And the third, the one she earned, the one that should have been her redemption, was taken by the very people she trusted to protect her. The girl who learned at 10 that no one could be trusted to love her for herself learned again, at 70, that the people closest to her would take what she had. The Commodore had once been worth more than the United States Treasury. His great-great-granddaughter, the most famous heir of his name, ended up selling her homes to pay her tax bill. How does the largest fortune in American history end in an heiress liquidating her estate to settle with the IRS? The answer is not bad luck. It is 100 years of a family that worshipped money and never once learned to protect the people who carried it. This is the devastation. Not 1 fall, but 3, inherited, married, and self-made. Each one a different proof of the same inherited flaw. And it brings us back at last to the words the founder spoke near the end of his life, the prophecy he left and never knew he was writing. At the very beginning, I told you Cornelius Vanderbilt left behind a belief about money and the people who inherit it, and that he meant it as wisdom. It is time to hear it. The Commodore who built it all from one boat is reported to have said, "Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it." He was right, and he was the one who guaranteed his own descendants would prove it, in the cruelest possible way. Because the same man who said it takes brains to hold on to money raised his family to believe that money was the only thing worth holding on to. He withheld love and dispensed cash. He measured his own children in dollars. He handed nearly everything to one son and crushed the rest. He taught the Vanderbilts to worship the fortune, and then handed them so much of it that not one of them ever had to learn how it was made. That was the seed. That was the darkest secret of the House of Vanderbilt. Not a crime, not a scandal, but a doctrine. A founder who loved money more than people, and bred that love into a bloodline until the people themselves became disposable, and only the money seemed real. And money, untended by anyone who understood it, does what untended things always do. It runs out. Within 70 years of the Commodore's death, it was said that not one of his descendants who gathered at a family reunion was a millionaire. The greatest fortune in American history had evaporated, and the man who warned that it takes brains to hold on to money had personally raised the family that would lose it all. Gloria was the last act of that long fall. She lost 3 fortunes not because she was foolish, but because she was a Vanderbilt, heir to 100 years of people who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. But Gloria's story does not end in the wreckage, because Gloria, alone among them, finally learned the lesson the Commodore never did. Gloria Vanderbilt lost 3 fortunes, but money was never the cruelest thing the Vanderbilt name took from her. With her 4th husband, the writer Wyatt Cooper, Gloria had finally built the thing she had hunted her whole life: a real home, a marriage of genuine love, and 2 sons, Carter and Anderson. For the first time, the poor little rich girl was simply a mother in a house full of warmth. It was everything the custody trial had stolen from her, rebuilt by her own hands. Then the losses came one after another with terrible speed. In 1978, Wyatt Cooper died during heart surgery. Gloria was a widow again, raising 2 boys alone. And then, on a July afternoon in 1988, came the blow that no fortune could have prevented, and no fortune could ever repair. Her son Carter, 23 years old, gentle, brilliant, struggling with a depression no one fully understood, walked onto the terrace of their 14th floor New York apartment as his mother pleaded with him. And in front of her, he let go. Carter Cooper died that day. Gloria watched it happen. Here is the final, unbearable proof of the lesson this whole story has been building toward. Gloria Vanderbilt had been born with the most golden name in America, and a multi-million-dollar trust, and it could not buy back her husband. It could not save her son. The fortune that the Commodore worshipped, that the family destroyed itself to control, was powerless before the only losses that truly matter. She had lost 3 fortunes. Now she had lost the only 2 things she had ever truly wanted to keep. And here is where Gloria Vanderbilt breaks the pattern, where the last heir of the doomed dynasty does the one thing none of her ancestors ever managed. She survived it, and she kept creating. The Commodore, faced with loss, grew colder and crueler. His descendants, faced with the fading fortune, simply spent harder and looked away. But Gloria, who had every reason to collapse into bitterness, did the opposite. She painted. She wrote memoir after memoir, examining her own wounds with astonishing honesty. She made art out of the very pain the family had always buried under marble. She lived, fully and openly, into her 90s. She had lost the inheritance, the marriages, the Jean's empire, her husband, her son. And what she had left at the end was not money. It was something no Vanderbilt before her had ever truly possessed: self-knowledge. The understanding of exactly what her family had been, what it had cost them, and what actually mattered. The Commodore said it takes brains to hold onto a fortune. Gloria learned the deeper truth he never grasped, that holding onto a fortune was never the point. That the things worth holding onto cannot be inherited, cannot be married, cannot be sold to the IRS. They have to be loved in person while you still have them. She could not pass down money. By the end, there was little left to pass. But she could pass down that hard-won wisdom, and she had one son left to give it to. His name was Anderson. Anderson Cooper grew up as the last well-known heir to the Vanderbilt name, and his mother raised him on a single revolutionary idea, one that would have horrified every Vanderbilt who came before her. She told him there was no trust fund. She told him, plainly, that he should expect to inherit nothing, that inherited wealth, in her words and her experience, was an initiative sucker, a curse dressed as a blessing. The descendant of the richest man in 19th century America was raised to believe he would have to earn his own, way from nothing, and he did. Anderson Cooper took no shortcut on the Vanderbilt name. He started at the bottom of journalism, took dangerous assignments most reporters refused, and built, slowly, on his own merit, a career as one of the most recognized newsmen in the world. For the first time in 5 generations, a Vanderbilt heir made his name mean something he had earned, not something he had been handed. See what just happened across this family tree. The Commodore handed everything to the son least likely to lose it. And the fortune died anyway, over a century of heirs who never had to earn a cent. Gloria handed her son almost nothing but the truth, and produced the most successful Vanderbilt heir in 3 generations. The thing the founder believed would protect his bloodline destroyed it. The thing he despised, having to start from nothing, saved it. When Gloria Vanderbilt died in 2019, at 95, the arithmetic of the whole dynasty had completely inverted. The Commodore left a fortune greater than the US, treasury and a family that fell apart. Gloria left a relatively modest estate, and a son who was whole. And Anderson Cooper, reflecting on it, said the thing that closes the 100-year circle. He said he was relieved there was no great fortune to inherit, that the money had, in the end, been the family's curse, and being free of it was a kind of gift. The great-great-great-grandson of the richest man in America counted himself lucky to inherit nothing. That is how far the House of Vanderbilt fell. And it is also, strangely, how it was finally redeemed, not by holding on to the fortune, but by a mother and a son who learned at last to let it go. But before the redemption there is one bitter truth left to face. The truth the whole story has been circling. The truth about what money actually does to the people we leave it to. Lay the whole dynasty out, end to end, and look at what one man's worship of money actually produced. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the founder, died in 1877, the richest man in America, and so cruel to his own children that he drove one son to contest his will and, ultimately, toward a hotel room and a gun. His favored son William doubled the fortune to $200 million, said the public be damned, and died 5 years later, the richest man in the world. The 3rd generation built palaces, the Breakers, Biltmore, the 5th Avenue Chateau, and spent so magnificently that within decades the mansions were sold or demolished, several torn down within their builders' own lifetimes. Reginald drank and gambled his share to nothing and died of cirrhosis at 45, leaving an infant daughter as bait on a trust fund. And that daughter, Gloria, was tried like property at 10, lost 3 fortunes across one lifetime, watched her son die in front of her, and reached the end of the line with a modest estate and the wisdom none of them ever had. One cause sit. S beneath all of it. Not bad luck. Not the income tax. Not the crash. The cause was a founder who decided that money was the only thing worth loving, and bred that conviction so deeply into his bloodline that the people themselves became disposable. He built a family that knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. And a family like that does not survive its own fortune. It is devoured by it. 70 years after the Commodore died richer than the US government, it was said that not one of the hundreds of Vanderbilt descendants gathered at a family reunion was a millionaire. How does the largest fortune in American history vanish so completely? The same way every great inherited fortune dies, handed to people who were taught to spend it and never taught why it mattered, by a founder who confused leaving them money with leaving them something worth having. The Vanderbilts had more money than anyone on earth, and it bought them suicides, broken marriages, a child on trial, demolished palaces, and a century of people who could not love each other because they had been trained to love a fortune instead. That is the full weight of it. The money was never the blessing. It was the curse, wearing the blessing's clothes. Be careful with the lesson, because it would be easy to take the wrong one. The lesson is not, money is evil, or never leave anything to your children. Money built railroads that united a nation. Wyatt Cooper and Gloria gave their sons a loving home. Money, used well, builds and protects. The villain was never the fortune. The villain was the trade. The quiet trade Cornelius Vanderbilt made on behalf of everyone who would ever carry his name. He chose money over people. He chose control over love. He decided that a child's worth was measured in dollars. And he bred that arithmetic so deep that it took 5 generations and 3 lost fortunes to finally break it. What he never understood, what cost his descendants everything to learn, is that money is a tool, not a love language. You cannot hand a child a fortune instead of yourself. The Vanderbilts tried, on the largest scale in American history, and it produced some of the loneliest, most damaged lives in American history. And this is where the dead Vanderbilts stop being a story and become a mirror. Because every parent makes a smaller version of the Commodore's trade. Every hour spent building the fortune instead of being present. Every time we tell ourselves the money is the love. That if we just leave them enough, they'll be safe. The Vanderbilts are the proof of where that ends. They left their children the greatest fortune on earth. They did not leave them the ability to be happy, or to trust, or to hold on to a single thing that mattered. Gloria figured it out, almost too late. She left her son the one inheritance that actually protects a child. She left him nothing and told him why. There is a boy, somewhere in your memory of this story, who quit school at 11 and borrowed money for a single boat, wanting wealth so badly he would crush anyone, including his own children, to build the greatest fortune America had ever seen. He got everything he wanted. He died richer than the United States Treasury. And within 70 years, the fortune was gone, the palaces were rubble, and the family that bore his name had learned, one tragedy at a time, that he had left them everything except the ability to be happy. And that gold signature on the worn denim, that is the whole story in one image. Not the railroads, not the mansions. A name that the Commodore built by hoarding, that his great-great-granddaughter finally redeemed by earning it back, stitch by stitch, with her own hands. Gloria Vanderbilt was the poor little rich girl who lost 3 fortunes, but she was the only Vanderbilt who ever understood what the fortune was really worth. And in the end, that made her the richest of them all.